The publication of Prince Harry's witness statement marks one of the most significant moments in the long and bitter struggle between the Duke of Sussex and the British press. For years, commentators have attempted to reduce Harry's legal battles to personal grievance, wounded pride, or an inability to move on from the past. But the release of this statement strips away those lazy narratives and replaces them with something far more serious, far more uncomfortable, and far more consequential. This is not a rant. This is not a memoir excerpt. This is sworn testimony, submitted in a court of law, setting out exactly why Harry believes the press crossed legal and moral lines for decades. At the heart of the statement is a truth that many prefer to avoid. Harry's relationship with the press was damaged long before he ever became an adult, long before he had any real agency, and long before he could meaningfully push back. When Harry refers to the year 1997, he is not invoking it for sympathy or nostalgia. He is identifying the moment when his understanding of the media fundamentally changed. At just 12 years old, he experienced not only the loss of his mother, but the aggressive and often exploitative behaviour of the press surrounding her life and death. That experience did not fade with time. Instead, it became the foundation upon which every subsequent interaction with the media was built. Harry explains that from that point onward, his relationship with the press was marked by unease and distrust. Importantly, he does not claim he was unaware of public interest or immune from scrutiny. What he describes instead is a childhood shaped by constant exposure to intrusion, speculation, and reporting that frequently ignored basic human boundaries. The death of his mother did not prompt restraint from the press. If anything, it reinforced a culture in which access and profit consistently outweighed empathy and responsibility. As Harry grew older, this uneasy relationship hardened into something more rigid and institutionalized. He describes being a member of what he calls the institution, a structure governed by long-standing rules designed to protect the monarchy's public image above all else. One of those rules, perhaps the most famous, was the policy of never complain, never explain. On the surface, the phrase is often portrayed as dignified and stoic, but Harry's statement reveals the darker reality beneath it. In practice, it meant enduring falsehoods without correction, accepting invasive coverage without challenge, and remaining silent even when boundaries were clearly crossed. Harry makes it clear that this silence was not voluntary in any meaningful sense. He says plainly that there was no alternative. He was conditioned to accept press behaviour as an unavoidable part of his role, regardless of the personal toll it took. This conditioning began early and was reinforced repeatedly, leaving him with little room to question whether what was happening was appropriate, lawful, or humane. When harmful stories appeared, the expectation was not to correct them, but to endure them. When private moments were exposed, the response was not outrage, but resignation. For many years, Harry complied with this expectation. He accepted that public interest came with sacrifice, and that his life would never truly be private. He performed his public duties, attended engagements, and fulfilled the role expected of him, even as the press scrutinized his relationships, his behaviour, and his personal struggles. What he did not accept, though perhaps he did not fully recognize it at the time, was that this scrutiny sometimes crossed into illegality. That realization would come later, shaped by experience and hindsight. The turning point in Harry's account arrives in late 2016, when his relationship with Meghan became public. This moment is crucial because it marks the shift from what Harry had long endured to something he found increasingly impossible to tolerate. The press coverage surrounding Meghan, he says, was not merely intrusive, it was persistent, aggressive, and in some cases explicitly racist. He describes articles that went beyond curiosity or critique and entered the realm of harassment and dehumanization. This was not simply about reporting on a new royal relationship. It was about constructing narratives that fed prejudice and hostility. What troubled Harry most during this period was not only the nature of the coverage, but the absence of meaningful response from within the system he had been raised to trust. The same institutional mechanisms that had once insisted on silence now appeared unwilling to protect him or the woman he loved. The expectation remained the same: endure, ignore, and move on. But for Harry, the cost of that silence had changed. It was no longer just his own well-being at stake. It was Meghan's safety, dignity, and mental health. Harry's statement emphasizes that this was the moment when the policy of inaction became untenable. Watching the press repeatedly attack Meghan, often using racially charged language and stereotypes, forced him to confront the consequences of compliance. The idea that remaining silent would somehow make the situation better was no longer believable. Instead, silence appeared to embolden further attacks, signaling that there would be no consequences for increasingly extreme behaviour. Crucially, Harry does not frame his legal action as a reaction to hurt feelings or negative publicity. He is explicit that this case is about accountability. He states that journalists, editors and executives employed unlawful methods to gather information about him. This distinction is essential. Harry is not asking the court to judge opinions or criticism. He is asking it to examine whether laws were broken in the pursuit of stories and whether powerful media organizations should be held responsible for those actions. This is precisely why the case has generated such intense resistance from sections of the British media. Acknowledging the substance of Harry's claims would require confronting uncomfortable questions about journalistic practices that have long been normalized or quietly ignored. It would mean admitting that the line between public interest and private exploitation was not merely blurred, but deliberately crossed. For outlets that have built reputations and profits on aggressive reporting, this is a deeply threatening prospect. Instead of engaging with the specifics of the witness statement, many commentators have chosen to dismiss it through familiar tropes. Harry is portrayed as resentful, obsessed with the past, or unwilling to accept criticism. These characterizations serve a strategic purpose. By focusing on Harry's perceived emotional state, critics avoid addressing the legal and ethical issues at the heart of the case. It is far easier to mock a man than to examine an industry. Yet, when one reads the statement itself, what stands out is not anger, but clarity. Harry's language is measured and deliberate. He traces a clear timeline, connecting his childhood experiences to his adult decisions. He explains not only what he believes happened, but why he responded the way he did. This is not the voice of someone lashing out. It is the voice of someone who has spent years reflecting on events that were once overwhelming and confusing. The broader implications of this case extend far beyond Harry himself. If the court finds that unlawful information gathering was widespread or systemic, it raises serious questions about press regulation, oversight, and accountability. It challenges the assumption that powerful institutions are self-policing or immune from consequence. It also forces a reconsideration of the relationship between public figures and the media, particularly when those figures are born into visibility rather than choosing it. Harry's witness statement also invites reflection on how society consumes media. The demand for constant access, intimate detail, and sensational narratives does not exist in a vacuum. It is driven by audiences as much as by editors. By bringing this case, Harry is not only challenging journalistic practices, but also prompting a broader conversation about what kind of media culture we are willing to support. Do we value truth, fairness, and accountability? Or are we complicit in rewarding intrusion and exploitation? One of the most striking aspects of the statement is Harry's acknowledgement of his own conditioning. He does not present himself as blameless or all-knowing. Instead, he admits that for many years he accepted the status quo, even when it harmed him. This admission adds credibility to his account. It demonstrates an awareness of how power structures shape behavior and how difficult it can be to challenge norms that have been reinforced since childhood. The decision to pursue legal action, then, represents a break from that conditioning. It is an assertion of agency that Harry was long denied. By choosing the courts rather than the tabloids, he is engaging with the system on its own terms. He is seeking judgment based on evidence and law, rather than public opinion or media spin. This choice undermines the narrative that he is simply seeking attention or validation. For critics who argue that Harry should have expected this treatment, the witness statement offers a powerful rebuttal. Expecting scrutiny does not mean consenting to illegality. Accepting public interest does not mean surrendering basic rights. Harry's case draws a line that has too often been erased in discussions about celebrity and privacy. It reminds us that the law applies regardless of status, and that harm does not become acceptable simply because it is familiar. As the case progresses, it will undoubtedly continue to provoke strong reactions. Some will view Harry's actions as necessary and overdue, while others will see them as disruptive or disloyal. But regardless of where one stands, the publication of this witness statement makes one thing clear. The issues at stake are serious, complex, and deserving of thoughtful consideration. Reducing them to personal drama does a disservice not only to Harry, but to the principles of justice and accountability. In the end, what Harry's asking for is not silence, sympathy, or special treatment. He is asking for scrutiny of the scrutinizers. He is asking that those who wield immense power over public narratives be subject to the same legal standards as anyone else. Whether the court ultimately agrees with him or not, the act of bringing these issues into the open is itself significant. This witness statement is not the final word in the story, but it is an important chapter. It provides context, clarity, and a perspective that has often been overshadowed by speculation and hostility. For viewers willing to look beyond headlines and talking points, it offers an opportunity to understand not just why Harry is fighting, but what that fight represents. As the legal process continues, the focus should remain on the evidence, the law, and the broader implications of the case. Personal attacks and caricatures may generate clicks, but they do little to address the fundamental questions raised by Harry's testimony. Questions about power, responsibility, and the cost of silence are not going away. Thanks to this witness statement, they can no longer be easily ignored.